The 1980 U.S. men's hockey team's victory over the Soviet Union in the Winter Olympics is often referred to as one of the greatest moments in sports history. Known as the Miracle on Ice, this story is celebrated for its sheer improbability, an amateur U.S. team defeating the powerful Soviet Union team, which had dominated international hockey for decades. However, behind this legendary moment lies a deeper, more personal story of the players, coaches, and the immense pressure they faced. This untold story explores the unseen struggles, challenges, and sacrifices that led to this iconic moment. The journey to the 1980 Winter Olympics began years before the iconic moment. Herb Brooks, the head coach of the U.S. team, was given the impossible task of defeating a Soviet team that had been unbeaten in international play for nearly 2 decades. Brooks knew he couldn't rely on the usual pool of experienced players, many of whom were not in the best physical shape, and his task was to build a team from scratch. Brooks selected young college players who had little to no experience in the NHL or international competition, with the aim of molding them into a cohesive unit. These players came from diverse backgrounds, some having a chip on their shoulder, while others were playing in the shadow of a more accomplished older generation. The players faced extreme sacrifices, from leaving their colleges to undergo grueling training camps with a coach who was relentless in his pursuit of perfection. Some players faced pressure from their families to leave the team, but they stayed, driven by an unprecedented sense of national pride and an unspoken desire to prove themselves. Herb Brooks was a genius at understanding the psychological aspects of the game. His training methods were nothing short of brutal, designed to push the players to their absolute limits. But Brooks wasn't just focused on building a strong physical team. He understood that the mental toughness of his players would be the key to their success. He needed a group of men who could overcome not just the physical strength of the Soviets, but also the overwhelming mental strain of facing one of the greatest teams in history. Brooks's motivational techniques were famously intense, and perhaps his most famous speech came just before the final Olympic match. The night before the game, the players were physically and emotionally drained. Brooks delivered a speech that has become legendary in sports lore. It was not a traditional speech filled with optimism, but rather a direct personal call to action. You were born to be a player. You were meant to be here. This moment is yours. Many players' families were unaware of the true extent of the sacrifices involved. The players weren't just training, they were facing media pressure, internal doubts, and public criticism for competing against a dominant Soviet team. The toll this took on their personal lives was immense. Some players would later recount the deep emotional strain that affected their relationships as they left behind their wives, children, and the life they knew. The Soviet Union team in 1980 was widely considered the best hockey team in the world with decades of dominance under their belt. Unlike the Americans, the Soviets were professionals with a deep bench of players who were almost all veterans of international play. The U.S. team was aware of the Soviets' dominance and their well-established psychological edge. Brooks's team was constantly reminded of the intimidation factor the Soviets carried, but he refused to let them believe they were outmatched. Brooks emphasized that while the Soviets had the physical strength, the Americans had the heart and desire. In many ways, it wasn't just about skill. It was about pride and representing a country that had been politically and economically challenged during the Cold War. Many people forget that the 1980 U.S. team wasn't just playing against the Soviets on the ice. They were playing against years of Soviet propaganda and Cold War tension. The Soviets' ice hockey team was a symbol of Soviet strength, and for the U.S. team, defeating them was about much more than just a hockey match. It was about proving a point on the global stage. The game itself, played at the Olympic Center in Lake Placid, was not just a hockey game. It was a physical and emotional war. The Americans had a narrow 4-3 lead heading into the final moments of the game, and tensions ran high. But one of the untold elements of the game was the immense pressure the American players faced in those last moments. The team, barely hanging on, had to fend off the Soviets' final pushes, The crowd, already on edge, became a silent participant in the battle. As the game neared its end, the American players were exhausted, struggling to hold on to their lead. The famous moment came when ABC broadcaster Al Michaels asked the now iconic question, "Do you believe in miracles?" It wasn't just a rhetorical question, it was the very question that had been hanging over the American players' heads since the moment they'd started training. After the victory, the players were celebrated, but few realized the emotional cost it took. While the victory brought them national fame, it also brought an avalanche of expectations and pressures. Some of the players never played another professional game after the Olympics, while others like Mike Eruzione and Jim Craig found themselves suddenly thrust into the limelight, despite knowing they weren't the most skilled on the ice. The team's lesser-known players like Steve Kristoff and Bob Suter never received the same level of recognition as their star teammates, yet they were integral to the win. Over the years, these players have often been overshadowed by the players who went on to professional careers in the NHL, and their personal stories of sacrifice and growth often remain untold. The pressure didn't end with the Olympic victory. Players, once celebrated as heroes, found themselves battling depression, anxiety, and personal struggles as they transitioned back to normal life after their historic moment. Some of them experienced difficulties adjusting to life after hockey, unable to live up to the high expectations set for them. The miracle on ice wasn't just a victory on the rink, it was a burden that many carried for years after. The 1980 victory did more than just boost American morale. It fundamentally changed the landscape of hockey in the United States. While many think of the win as a momentary blip, the truth is it inspired a generation of young athletes to pick up a hockey stick and dream of greatness. The Forgotten Revolution. The impact was seen not just in the NHL, where American players began to rise through the ranks, but also in the cultural acceptance of hockey in schools across the country. The Miracle on Ice may have been a once-in-a-lifetime event, but its ripple effect reshaped U.S. hockey forever. The Miracle on Ice wasn't just about a game. It was about a team of misfits who were thrust together against all odds, coached by a man who saw something no one else did, and a nation that believed they could defeat an empire. This untold story isn't just about the victory on the ice, it's about the human spirit, the sacrifices made behind closed doors, and the emotional toll that heroes often pay for their moments of glory.